Welcome to this week's news program. I'm your host, Diana Longree. Thank you for tuning in. Joining me today is my co-anchor, Mr. Kevin Berglund. Thank you, Mr. Berglund, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Now, today we are going to finish up on our report of the joint meeting held between the Maplewood City Council and the HEDC Commission. As you probably recall from our previous newscast, Maplewood had a commission that was called the HEDC, the Housing Economic Development Commission, and they were charged with looking at the business interests in Maplewood and doing developments that might, of course, spur on business in Maplewood. Additionally, looking at housing development in Maplewood, thus the name the Housing and Economic Development Commission. The Maplewood City Council decided to take certain actions where they changed some of the powers and authority of that commission and in essence stripped many of their statutory powers from them and then left them as a commission wondering what their role was going to be. After all of this happened, then the Maplewood City Council decided, well, let's have a joint meeting with this commission and talk to them about housing development, about business development, after they've already stripped them of their statutory power. Some might be scratching their heads, wondering why would they do this? Well, certainly it left a few of the commission members scratching their heads as well. Now, we are going to finish up our report on this November meeting because they have coming up this month, in the month of January and February, they have another joint meeting that we're going to be covering, so we want to keep in mind what has gone by in the past meeting so we know whether or not if they've accomplished anything as they move into their next joint meeting. Now, Mr. Berglund, I know that you've been watching this topic. Any quick comments that you may have?
Well, I think your city manager of Maplewood, Melinda Coleman, has a knotty problem because what she wants to do to Maplewood, of course she doesn't live in Maplewood, she can't persuade the citizens who are on these citizens commissions that it's the right thing to do, in my opinion, that they don't buy into what she has in mind. Now, of course, because Maplewood is a city manager city under the state statutes, the city manager has tremendous authority and can do whatever she wants. So I think she basically got tired of trying to persuade Maplewood residents that this has to be done, and she says, forget it. We'll just consolidate our power, take away their power, and then I'll be able to do what I want to do.
And certainly, to be clear, what they did in taking the statutory power away from the HEDC Commission, they then took that power and gave it to the City Council as the Economic Development Authority. Now, the Economic Development Authority did have statutory power, but now it's got even more statutory power. And the members of the EDA, the Economic Development Authority, in Maplewood, are the city council members. So there's really no checks and balances between the EDA and the city council, whereas in some communities, the members who serve on the EDA are not members of the council, or that only a certain percentage of the members on the EDA are members of the council. In Maplewood, they're all one and the same, so there are no checks and balances.
And of course, you might say, well, then the city council is representing the residents. Of course, Maplewood, again, always the city of Maplewood, the council is struggling for legitimacy. The government under Melinda Coleman is struggling for legitimacy because 3 of the 5 people on the council are not there by the election of the people. They found other roundabout ways or to put them on there. So in
they're
my
all
mind,
appointed, in other words.
Appointed.
They're appointed. So you've got 3 out of the 5 council members to Maplewood City Council are appointed.
And in my mind, those the mayor who is appointed is a litigation attorney, so she has a very strong voice appointed. And these 3 members are, in my opinion, accountable to Melinda Coleman and not to the electorate of the city of Maplewood.
Now, this particular jointly held meeting in November was not filmed by the city for public viewing. Now, the city did film it, but they didn't film it for public viewing. They filmed it so they could make little YouTube vignettes to market their efforts to do development in Maplewood, or how they're working together with members of the community, but not so that members of the community could watch the entire meeting, like they could watch an entire meeting of the city council, or like they could watch the meeting of the HEDC when they have their meetings. So we had our cameras there and we filmed it. And Mr. Berglund, who was our cameraman that night, had some questions with regard to why the city wasn't filming this meeting like they do their other regular meetings. Let's take a look.
The slide is over here for folks.
Mark, how you doing?
Doing good.
Yeah, why didn't you guys put this on video today? I mean, why aren't you running it? You got a camera guy here anyway.
Because we can't get sound, Kevin. We can't get people's voices when we do it in here. Like, the mics are up in different places and it doesn't work in a group setting.
So despite all this money you spent on here, you don't have the ability to get sound?
We can't. That is correct. So we're doing it this way.
You used to before the
It
renovation.
never worked.
I would watch it on cable TV, it worked.
That's not what you told me 3 years ago or 4 years ago, last time you did it.
I don't recall that.
Volunteer who's happy the city is listening to the commission and getting together with us to spend time building a really good plan.
And it's all about transparency, isn't it, and openness, Mark?
That's why we're here.
It should be on cable TV. It's, I mean, you took off the heritage preservation. You got a camera person here.
I'm watching this. We have a camera that is a fraction of the cost of the camera that the city's camera guy is using that same night. And I clearly could hear Melinda Coleman say that the reason that they couldn't record the meetings is because the microphones don't work, and it's clear you can't hear in there, it doesn't work. And yet, Mr. Berglund, I could hear her very clearly on the microphones on our little camera. What about the camera that their cameraman's using? If we were to request that film footage under the Data Practices Act, would we find that there was no audio because the microphone doesn't work? Does this explanation hold water?
I seen the city manager there, and we just played it again, Melinda Coleman. And I'm not sure if she's being a stand-up comic or what.
Well, I certainly find it very humorous, because there she is telling us how the microphones don't work, and I can hear her clearly and plainly. And I'm sure that if anybody was there filming it on their telephone, you could hear it clearly and plainly as well.
And like you say, the city, when they're buying this camera equipment, the cost is no matter. They buy the top of the line, the very best. And the camera that cameraman had looked like a nice, shiny, brand new camera.
Well, now let's go and take a look at our first clip, where one of the members of the HEDC Commission is a little puzzled and wondering why, after all these years, is the City Council now paying any attention to the HEDC Commission?
But some clarity on what sort of drove this meeting coming about. provides, yeah, some, I guess, context for, you know, having to be here, but I've been out of the loop.
Well, I'm gonna look to the heads of chair first. Mark, you can try and answer, and then Bill, you're the chair of the EDA. I'll ask you to kind of go second, and then we'll get the group to weigh in if there's anything that was missing. Is that helpful? Great.
So, well, as I said, some of the commission members are a little puzzled because they know that the city council has just stripped them of their statutory power, and now the council wants to meet with them to get their input and get their insight. Couldn't that have been done months ago, years ago? Why now? Well, let's continue with our next clip.
I think it's important to note Joyce's concern too. Move with the HRA was not a move as far as trying to limit the voices involved in the discussion. It was more of a structural move to simplify the decision-making process into a single authority. But I think this meeting and future meetings should show that the intention is to broaden that discussion to commissions at CB and E, but potentially others in the future too. As we look how to do this, because it is going to take a big team to figure out how best to do this. So I hope that helps.
Councilmember Brian Smith, Mr. Berglund, you heard him. He said, well, this is not to limit the voice of the community. He's trying to fend off their actions of taking away the statutory power from the Hedsey Commission by saying, well, we're not trying to eliminate your voice in the community and into these development issues, and that's why we're getting together now, so that we can hear your voice. Well, doesn't this again seem a little disingenuous, a little after we've already taken everything away? Well, now we're going to pretend we're going to give you an olive leaf, an olive branch.
And of course, these citizens commissions were all appointed by the council, and Maplewood has a very bad problem under Mayor Nora Solwig and Mary Abrams of just appointing their buddies or their associates or their people who are exactly ideologically like them, and people who knuckle under these commissions. And even with these appointments, they still want to be the law unto themselves, even though they will get up and talk about how transparent they are, how they want to hear community voices and citizens' engagements. They consolidate, they have less openness in terms of having mics on, cameras on, no citizen engagement in terms of a mayor's forum or a citizen's forum.
And that's what you mean when you say that this council wants to be a power unto itself.
Yes.
That it doesn't want to have anybody or anyone in the community to challenge the direction, to insert new ideas into that public policy that they are charged with making.
And I think what happens is when residents come up and challenge, residents expect an explanation of why they're doing what they're doing. Why did you make that decision? Melinda Coleman, in my mind, she clearly does not have the time to explain her actions.
And the explanation is the mics don't work. We can't let the public know what went on this meeting because the mics don't work. How simplistic an answer.
Absolutely.
And yet clearly it is a false answer. Well, let's continue with our next clip.
Switch on to the next segment, and I talked about reviewing the survey results, and thank you for those folks who did the Survey Monkey. I know that it was a little bit maybe to just get this random email asking for perspective. So folks who provided that, I did that. This is kind of an opportunity for Jeff to sort of come up and talk a little.
We got a real good shot there of that camera that the city owns, and it looked to me like on the top of it was a really big microphone with a really big wind muffle. Wow.
And plus you could see he had a audio in his ear, so he was carefully as a professional, monitoring the quality of the sound.
So I would say that if we were to ask for a copy of that film footage under the Data Practices Act, we would find that the audio would not only be there, but it would be spectacular. As you heard, the members who attended this joint meeting apparently completed a survey on SurveyMonkey. Now, he doesn't really break down exactly who answered, how many of the 5 council members versus how many members of the HETC Commission. I mean, what if it was only 2 people from the HETC Commission and the 5 council members, 3 of who are appointed? Wouldn't that give you a different perspective of what they feel are the concerns of the community when it comes to development versus if you had all of the members of the HETC Commission answering the survey versus just 2 or 3 of the council members? I think it possibly could change the complexion of the responses and the direction of the discussion.
And of course, with Maplewood, under Melinda Coleman, of course, if they're taking a survey on SurveyMonkey and then they're discussing that at their public meeting, meaning the public can walk in on this if they can find out where it is. Although that SurveyMonkey stuff should be right there on the table for the public to look at, the results, the questions. But of course, months later, there's no indication it's anywhere. It wasn't there that night, and it hasn't appeared anywhere on the internet, and it's just another problem in the governance of Maplewood. Under Melinda Coleman, it's better to have government behind the curtain.
The Iron Curtain. Let's continue.
Supposed to identify some of the areas that they think the city of Maplewood should focus on for economic development, redevelopment going forward. Some of these will be very familiar, some of these will be less familiar, so Jeff is going to respond to all of them, but I'm just going to read them. Really, North End development, bus rapid transit, and transit-oriented development. The acronyms over there are bus rapid transit and transit-oriented development. I apologize, I'm an acronym fan. Freak is the appropriate word. Maplewood Business Council, where could we enhance that? Could we do some more work with that? Gladstone development area. Partnerships and tools. This emerges as a key piece, whether it's external partners who do potentially financing, or are there other government agencies that have programs and things that we could partner with. Another theme that emerged was business incubators, small business enterprises. Is there a way to encourage entrepreneurship in the...
From our reporting on the meetings of the HETC, that the HETC actually hasn't had much of an opportunity of any kind to even talk about the North End study until it was done. To talk about the BRT, the Maplewood Historical Society, they talked a lot about the BRT, the bus rapid transit, because they actually had a member of their commission on the committee that was to hear where the stops were going to be placed in Maplewood. But I don't believe that any of the members of the HETC Commission were ever appointed to any of the standing committees, subcommittees for the BRT. So I don't think this generated from one of their committee members. And it isn't really until you get down to the end of that list that you then start getting to those topics that I think are generated by the representatives from the commission, which are the representatives of the people in the community.
And to know the score, you look at the city council, I don't think Sylvia Netblett, an appointed member, has much knowledge, much knows the ropes, has much interest in the whole long-term discussion that they've had with Ramsey County and Norris Sawick on what the BRT is, what are the studies of the BRT, what are the factors. The BRT, the bus rapid transit, and then transit-oriented development I don't think Bill Knutson, another member, has any knowledge or discussion or experience with that.
And quite
Kathy
frank-
Judeman,
right.
I don't think she cares to be examining that. I've never heard her discuss it. So
Because she has her rubber stamp
Right.
that says, rubber stamp, I do what Melinda Coleman says, ta-chunk.
yes, and so when many of these things are based upon their transient-oriented development, the north end, you'll notice they put those other two initials after it, Gladstone. They could have easily put that behind that, Bus Rapid Transit, because they're both on the same line. The question is, so who did come up with these points? I doubt it was the council. I think it was our fearless and ever-respected leader, the grand city manager of Maplewood, Melinda Coleman, who of course could choose to live in Maplewood if she loved the community, if she had a passion about the community. But of course she will tell you she made a conscious decision to be not in Maplewood and to live in Washington County because it was more rural. I expect they didn't have to have a sanitary, they didn't have to have big sanitary sewer assessments. They had lower property taxes, better education, etc.
I think one time in one of her interviews with you, she indicated to you that isn't she entitled to a nice house? Yes. Well, so are the residents of Maplewood.
Workforce development emerged in the survey answers, and this is a big theme sort of in the realm of economic development statewide, and so it emerged as a piece. There's this very broad category of housing, and I couldn't capture all of it. But talking about home buyer programs, housing rehab, housing types and product mix. Does the community have the right type of product mix? Is there a way to do some scattered site development, redevelopment? So housing is very big and very broad, and so that's why I rely on staff. And then this is business retention and expansion, and so I will stop there. This list is not limited. I just ran out of room on the paper, so if somebody says there's got to be one more thing on there, we've got another 20 or so sheets.
Workforce development. Now, this is the first time that we have heard either the Maplewood City Council address workforce development. Are they an employment agency? I have never heard the Hedsey Commission talk about workforce development. Now, I do know that there have been a number of discussions with the Century College and maybe having partnership programs with them and having a job fair at the community center that is run by the YMCA. Perhaps that's workforce development.
And I don't know if we should lay an egg or not, but it seems like the issues that might have come out of the Hedsey Commission, the members there, the citizen group, or the council were the last two.
Yes.
Housing redevelopment, housing renovation money, and then the other one was equally something that they would have talked about, business expansion, what do we need to do. And yet this gentleman here, who he doesn't have a name tag there, but he is another new assistant city manager of Maplewood. He just discounts those two as, oh, it's so big, so because it's such a big expansion area, and this is what, and the subtext is, which you are all interested in, but it's so big, we're just going to put it together and make it small and kind of dismiss it.
And the Hedsey Commission has spent extensive amount of time on business retention,
Right.
which is like last on the list. They have been involved.
Last on their list.
Last on this list.
Yes.
And they have been involved over the past few years of actually going to various businesses in Maplewood and reaching out to the businesses of Maplewood to get input from them on a limited basis, but that's what members of the Hedsey Commission have done. And yet we find it is on the end of the list when that should be one of Maplewood's top priorities, because in the end, doesn't that have an impact on jobs and employment in Maplewood, not workforce development, but employment in Maplewood.
And of course, if the city manager would lay all the cards on the table, those two things, of course, require the most work in having energy of the city staff, Melinda Coleman, to figure them out, because they're detailed issues. Instead, they're going to discuss this elixir issue, the big hope that they're going to put a close to $1 billion train, not train, but bus, and what's going to result from this big concrete busway that's just to be used by buses which are coming from St. Paul going to nowhere, White Bear Lake. This is going to result in the new and improved and the grand Maplewood. Instead of doing the work which the city government is supposed to do to make sure you have good roads, good housing, good business, good government, we're going to wipe that aside because that's too much work, and we're just going to say, I had a dream. I had a dream that we had a bus route on its own route going through people's backyards. And what's going to happen? We're going to have a new Maplewood, and it is going to be a big, sustainable, grand Maplewood, a destination.
In conflict with that theory, that dream, that vision of the illustrious city manager is then the viewpoint of the Maplewood Police Department and many of the rank and file in the Maplewood Police Department, that running the BRT down a desolate roadway in the back of people's backyards where there's little or no access for the police and public safety people to access, that it is actually going to be a contributor to crime increase in Maplewood, and that they will have little or no opportunity of being able to monitor it or to respond to calls because of where the location is. Conversely, if it would have been simply put on Highway 61 where buses belong, we probably wouldn't have that type of issue.
And of course, if they would be on 61, they would be park and rides and connecting buses that go to stations.
And you know what? Isn't there a park and ride on Highway 61 already? Oh, and isn't there one already at the Maplewood Mall that would easily be connected to the one on Highway 61? I think I see a plan, but it's not the plan. Well, let's continue with our film footage.
Yeah.
Yes, I feel like this is equal parts. You will probably already know a lot of this information, and a quiz for me, how much I'm understanding this information. So just to kind of describe them and what we've been doing on each of these fronts. So the North End Vision Plan, we're all familiar with. That's here around Maplewood Mall, and the hospital, which we just earlier this year adopted kind of the vision plan for the next 20 years of development in the North End. The BRT and TOD component are the Rush Line corridor having 2 stops within the North End. That's pretty obvious.
Okay, so we have another cast member.
Yes, introduce our next cast member.
And this is part of the big bunch, the administrative manager bunch, part of this ever-expanding
Mushroom.
He is in charge of economic development, I guess. And as he said, we all know what the big vision is of the North End. That would be the Maplewood Mall. And I'm thinking, do we all know? Nora Sawick had led the mayor who resigned from the Metropolitan Council after she was appointed by the governor. Her vision was we were going to make Maplewood Mall into a big education institution. And that's what a lot of people in Maplewood see. What does he see that we all know?
And keep in mind, turning the Maplewood Mall into some type of educational institution, would mean it's most likely would not be part of the tax base.
Right.
Oh boy, that's a great vision. Let's turn prime commercial real estate into nonprofit island that pays no property taxes. Oh, that's an excellent plan, Nora Slawick.
Because
well, thank goodness the master plan that eventually came out of all this didn't include that. But what it does include is that it includes housing and voucher housing instead, which of course is going to pay property taxes, but at property taxes at differing rates than the prime commercial real estate.
Now, am I incorrect to think that right now Maplewood Mall area pays a ton of property taxes? And if you take that big golden egg of property taxes away from that, and everybody at Maplewood Hall, these administrators keep blossoming and expanding like a mushroom, who ends up subsidizing the property tax bill?
Oh, wow. All the people in Maplewood who'd like to have a nice house. Maybe we'll have to move to Matamidi and be neighbors with the city manager. We heard in that last clip where he discussed that St. John's has put together their plan for the next 20 years and what they're going to do. He makes it sound like those plans are expansion plans. However, in previous clips that we have played on these programs from other meetings where they have been more clear at the North End Steady Work Group meetings where we got this information, is that the St. John's Hospital does not have plans to expand. And that's in part because of some of the changes in trends for hospitals. More and more of the surgical procedures that require an overnight stay today, or even those who required an overnight stay 5 years ago, are now being put on a list as surgeries that can be done for day surgeries, which eliminates the overnight stay. So hospitals, not just St. John's, but hospitals everywhere, are struggling with a change in paradigm in that they have more beds than what they need. Now, of course, this brings us back then, Mr. Berglund, to appointed city council member, Mr. Bill Knutson. He has been the past administrator of St. John's Hospital. And from my understanding, he continues to work as a consultant in the area of health care. And yet, he supports the idea that the plan should be in Maplewood under the North End study that they need to put a big hotel next to the hospital, that there's going to be people coming in from all around who are going to stay at that hospital because their loved ones are staying overnight at St. John's Hospital. Now that seems very inconsistent with what the trends are, overnight stays in hospitals and how that number is going down, and the fact that we know that St. John's is not a hospital serving the northern half of Minnesota. Instead, they are a neighborhood hospital, basically serving people who live within a 20-minute radius.
And the appointed council member, Bill Knutson, the old guy on there, will tell you that he is an expert. He will not tell you enough that he is an expert on hospitals, that he started hospitals, that he developed hospitals, that he has a consulting business which he does hospitals. So why wouldn't we want to believe Bill Knutson that St. John's Hospital will need all kinds of hotels? Because I guess he must see St. John's Hospital, I assume he's being genuine, as being a destination hospital, that people are going to come there for day surgery from all over the upper Midwest maybe, and they're going to have to arrive a day early and stay there. And the surgeons it's going to attract is going to attract all the best and the brightest surgeons, so they're going to be able to buy some of that voucher housing.
Before we go on to the next clip, I want to mention to our viewers that you'll notice now that the staff in charge of economic development in Maplewood is going through each of those points from the quote survey results. They're not really discussing each of these items. He's just telling them a summary. So what is the value of actually going through this? I'm not sure, but they certainly spend some time on it. So let's take a look at our next clip.
The Maplewood Business Council, so we partner, it's really a program that's run by the St. Paul Area Chamber. It's a group that meets like every, 8 times a year generally. It's like they meet once, it's like 2 out of every 3 months. They meet, they talk about bringing the business community together and over breakfast and hitting a topic in an hour time frame, hitting some sort of topic that the business community is interested in learning more about and having a conversation about.
As he indicated, they have contracted with the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce to have quarterly meetings where they send out a little notice to some Maplewood businesses and say, well, we're going to give a little presentation and you're invited to come. Well, and of course, if you go, now you are suddenly, participating in the Maplewood Business Council. But you don't make any decisions. You don't discuss any of the policies for businesses. You don't talk about business retention. None of that happens. Instead, you just listen to a presentation where somebody is telling you about what the police efforts are to cut down on crime is one of them, what to do when there's shoplifting. Oh my goodness, now that sounds like an important topic to be sharing with your business community. That must mean that there's a lot of concern about shoplifting in Maplewood.
And if this was occurring at a senior center, they wouldn't call it the senior council. They would call it the weekly coffee hour or the coffee clutch because it's nothing else than that. There's no, actually at the senior center, there might actually be some representatives. Maybe somebody is in charge of actually running it. That would be called the senior center, and that would be called the senior council, I guess.
Let's continue with the next clip.
So that's the neighborhood near kind of centered at Frost and English. The plan was adopted, the Vision Neighborhood Plan in 2007-ish, 2008. And then the city's been kind of, part of its capital improvement plan, buying properties, slowly and then selling them off for developers. The most notable project being the Sherman's Frost and English Village.
Now this particular one is a hoot because the third item on the list is the Gladstone neighborhood. It just simply said Gladstone. He's talking about the master plan that was adopted in 2007. Well, I was the mayor back then, and yes, we adopted the citizens plan, the residence plan for the development and renovation, rejuvenation of the Gladstone neighborhood. But what the city is engaged in now is different than what that master plan was that was adopted back in 2007. Because the buildings now are taller than what the plan called for. The buildings and the units are denser than what the plan called for by double. There's all kinds of things that have just been changed without anybody being cognizant of it at all. And you notice how he slipped in there, how the city of Maplewood has been slowly buying up properties in that neighborhood, in the Gladstone neighborhood. These purchases should have been run by the Housing and Economic Development Commission, the HEDC, before the council did it. But you know what? Over the years when the Maplewood City Council's been making these purchases for redevelopment and all these initiatives that they've created, they didn't run their plans by the HEDC Commission first.
In fact, and they didn't, of course, lay it out to the public.
Well, and it's fascinating in that there's this one parcel that the city purchased, which is next to the Sherman and Associates development on the corner of Frost and English, that the city bought, that I don't recall was actually even on the agenda for discussion. Maybe it was a consent agenda item, but the council never discussed purchasing that little lot. And then there's, of course, the purchase of the parcel that is further west of the intersection of Frost and English, where the city of Maplewood had a few years ago the opportunity. They could have bought it as tax forfeiture land, but under Mayor Rosbach, they did not do so. And then later on, somebody, a private individual, bought the property, wanted to use it for a particular purpose, and the city said, oh no, we can't have you using it for that purpose, so we'll pay you twice what you paid for it. So then they bought that land from that individual at twice the price that he paid for it, and I don't believe that that was ever on the city council agenda either for discussion.
And this gentleman who's head of economic development, of course, he's new to the city. So I think he's just being fed the lines of what's going on there, and he's just the MC, and just he's the talking hand, the mouth for the city manager, Melinda Coleman.
And I think you've identified this correctly. He is the MC for that summary sheet that the assistant city manager has already presented.
Right. Now, of course.
See, so you've got the city manager who's in the background watching all this. You've got the assistant city manager presenting the points. And now you've got the economic development director going through it again and emceeing the points again.
And interesting enough, MC in this case stands for Master of Ceremonies and not for Melinda Coleman. And what's hard to believe is that he's able to try to keep a straight face. He kind of twists his face up now and then, and I don't know what the symbolic message of that is, but I can't believe he's not cracking up laughing at this whole thing. But I mean, if you're getting a nice city government paycheck, I guess there's a strong incentive to try to keep a straight face. And when the humor just gets too much, you just kind of twist and turn your face a little bit, so it doesn't emerge.
Well, let's hear the MC of the next point.
Tools is the most broad category. There are all sorts of examples that can be out there. That's part of our existing partnerships with the chamber around our business council and our business retention. It could be partnerships with Ramsey County on their programs with the Department of Employment and Economic Development, with Minnesota Housing, nonprofit organizations around housing and economic development. We've also I think that's where the developer forum fits in. There's been some conversations about, sitting down with developers and understanding not only understanding their perspective, but also kind of soliciting interest in some of the areas of Maplewood that we strategically want to focus on. So that's a pretty broad category that we could kind of further refine as we talk about.
We can develop partnerships. And this word partnership is really an abused word, because most of these relationships that the city of Maplewood claims that they have entered into are not partnerships in the least bit. Oftentimes what ends up is that Maplewood is the one that is doing all the funding of the relationship, and that's not a partnership. Generally, when you have a partnership, you have both entities are contributing equal in some way. Generally, Maplewood is the heavy lifter in almost all of these, and they just tag somebody else's name on there to make it look good.
One entity that Melinda Coleman is not in partnership with, at least I never expressed it in any way, is the people who are actually paying the bills, the property taxpayers. There doesn't seem to be any partnership there. Another thing he pointed out again, it's our Maplewood Business Council, like it's our Maplewood Planning Commission or our Maplewood Park Commission. Another false and misleading statement. I mean, if you would listen to this stuff, I don't know how you could make heads or tails of what's going on in your city.
Let's see what he has to say about the next point.
Business incubator and small business enterprise. These programs are generally around specifically around startup companies, various small businesses. They can be just like seed funds for those. It can also be capital funds or capital programs to help them do like facade improvements or something around making a physical expansion to the business. So, but focus really on our small business community that exists.
Okay, that's the definition of a business incubator program or a business retention program. That is very general, generic. It actually now is not focused on any particular initiative in Maplewood.
That has ever occurred or there is any expectation to occur. A business incubator, of course, is you're trying to incubate everybody's familiar with it because they see all the money made out in Silicon Valley, all these golden eggs that were laid. Of course, there's never been a program to do anything as if you're going to get any kind of investors together or get any kind of startups or what did he call it? He had all kinds of words that he was using as if we were in the middle of the Silicon Valley out and just around the corner was the big, the big blossoming.
And here's the contrast. In the previous clips, he identified at least something that was being done in Maplewood by somebody in Maplewood doing something. In
A
this,
business council, their business council.
right.
They were meeting and having coffee.
Well, and with the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce. I mean, it had some specifics. This particular one had no specifics. And if they really wanted to talk about how they were going to partnership with some business in the community for a business incubator, that would be very welcome. I mean, certainly you've got companies like Target Corporation where they have actually undertaken similar types of initiatives of incubating technology companies who are producing products that are helpful for the retail industry. And then from there you have your startup companies and then they can move on from there. Now, wouldn't it be unique if Maplewood reached out to, say, 3M and said, is there a way that we can look at the model that Target has used and do that with you? Now, that would be a way that they could actually take many of these points and do the work. But as you indicated previously, that would involve doing some real work rather than just saying we're going to hang our hat on the magical, mystical BRT.
And of course, you're laboring here under the idea that there would actually be a private or nonprofit business incubator from 3M. Or the business incubator is right there, an office away from this meeting room, in the office of the city manager. He and her, I guess, are going to be the brainchild of this big business incubator because maybe they have masters of business degrees.
Oh, there you go. How foolish of me to think that we could look beyond the walls.
Well, maybe we
of
can, but
City
they're
Hall.
not to that point there. They're talking about what's going to go on in Miss Melinda Coleman's office when she's going to be sitting on the nest of all the eggs.
And of course, this then makes me apprehensive because I know that the one loan that Maplewood gave out for business development was to one company, and since that time they haven't even developed rules or policies or criteria that if they should give out another one of these similar type of loans, what that criteria would be. So if they haven't developed criteria for an internal program, oh my goodness, we're lost.
I think Melinda Coleman, and in her nest there in her office, she's just going to go by her gut, like she thinks the angel investors do. I see your plan, I feel a good feeling in my gut, I can make some money, I'm going to give you all the money. I don't think Melinda Coleman wants to have any process or
And-
have any rules or have
that-
any criteria.
And that in and of itself is scary because angel investors don't operate that way. So if City Hall is under that impression, that too is scary.
Bryce Larpenter, that's a vision plan from 2016 that we adopted, 2017 we adopted. And then just this year kind of have launched the interim Bryce Larpenter Alliance with the city of St. Paul, with Roseville, and with Ramsey County. So the 3 cities in Ramsey County, leading not only kind of actively promoting the vision plan and the development that kind of occurs within that, but also doing kind of community engagement within that neighborhood, doing events, doing marketing, doing business outreach, community outreach, kind of having an organization that's dedicated to not only the intersection of Bryce Larpenter, but also kind of the Rice Avenue corridor as it goes all the way out to Highway 36.
And I actually caught him blurting out there for a moment of laughter before he repressed it of the whole, I think he was probably laughing at the whole absurdity of the situation.
And we have covered the Rice and Larpenter study area, and we also have covered the fact that the appointed mayor, Marley Abrams, was all bent out of shape that one of the businesses on the Maplewood side, which had boat storage, wasn't storing the boats the way she wanted them to be stored, and yet right across the way on the other side of Rice Street, you have a brand new tobacco and hookah store with all the big neon lights blazing in the dark and creating light pollution, which Sean Finwall up at City Hall, one of the administrators, is always championing that. She even testified, didn't she, at the state legislature against light pollution. So you've got the mayor of Maplewood, who's appointed, who is coming down hard on a Maplewood business for not storing the boats properly the way that she thinks they should be stored. And on the other side of the street, she could care less about the big neon blazing lights.
They're big, and again, all you hear him talk about is the vision, the big vision. Now, again, I don't know what vision means, but I think it's a big dream.
And you know what? I think on the other corner of that intersection, across from that big neon flashing lights for the tobacco store and the hookah supplies and all, right across the street on the St. Paul side is the lamplighter.
Right.
And yet you've got appointed Mayor Marley Abrams bent out of shape about a Maplewood business who's not storing the boats the way she wants them stored. And yet she's not complaining about what's going on the Roseville side of the street or the St. Paul side of the street.
Well,
Wow.
they give
now,
a big,
what's going on here? And they're concerned about business retention.
I think
We've got our own mayor coming down hard on our own businesses and not asking these other cities what are they doing about theirs.
and when they say we had a vision, they never say we had a vision which was this. We have this vision. They all these visions, and you all know what these visions are. Nobody knows what the visions are, except like Rice and Larpenter, as you mentioned, right there. You got the lamplighter, and you have the big tobacco shop. As if you're on the main section
And then you got
of Las Vegas.
Yeah.
That's maybe the big vision. Rice and Larpenter is going to be the entertainment destination.
I can see the vision now. Let's continue.
Workforce development, that's something, I read I'm going to jump down below to the business retention. So as we've done our business outreach over the past couple of years, I've read the reports, and then this year I've been in a lot of these business visits. We hear a lot about workforce, a ton about workforce, and the challenges a lot of our business sector are experiencing around trying to attract the workforce that they need to be successful. You know, we know that Century College has partnered with some workforce. The school districts are involved in workforce development. So it could be anything around improving our business community's access to talent within Maplewood to make sure that our business communities.
I love it how he says, okay, now we're going to talk about workforce development. Okay, let's just jump down to business retention. And because he needs a segue to get to this workforce development, because really, what can City Hall do about workforce development? That's not really their role, is it? And he does allude to Century College is doing some things, and he's saying how Maplewood then can connect up Maplewood businesses with the workforce development programs at Century College. Except that, why isn't Century College already doing that? Well, maybe because they're in another town, and maybe they're connecting up with the businesses in their town.
And you know, I don't know if this is a laughing matter or a sad matter, but it seems clearly, if you're listening to that, he is just winging it. He's just grasping. And you're thinking, you're professional, you're trained and experienced in economic development, and you're coming here to this meeting where all these people, representatives, are sitting, apparently going to be making decisions, and you haven't even given this any forethought. We hear about this, it's just on the fly. And I'm thinking, you're the key guy there that's going to be to the new vision of the Grand Maplewood?
This reminds me of something that we just recently saw in St. Paul. Over off of Larpenteur and McKnight, a different part of Larpenteur, because Maplewood does have Larpenteur go all the way through it. At the intersection of Larpenteur and McKnight, on the St. Paul side, is the Hillcrest development area that used to be the golf course. And the St. Paul Port Authority has their big vision on how that's going to be developed now that the Port Authority has purchased it. And in looking at one of their memos, I recall that they said that one of the visions that the Port Authority had for that Hillcrest development area was to create an employment center. Maybe Maplewood is just taking a little guidance from the Port Authority's playbook, and so when they say that they want to be engaged in workforce development, they think they're the St. Paul Port Authority establishing an employment center in the location of some neighborhood someplace.
One thing about the Hillcrest Golf Course in St. Paul, on the border with Maplewood right there, is at least they're making up some numbers. We're going to have 1,000 industrial jobs, and those are all going to be sustainable jobs. And we're going to have 1,000 housing units. We're going to have 1,000, and we're going to have 1,000, and we, as the city, are standing behind that. Now in Maplewood, what you have him saying there, well, we heard about it. I heard a little on the radio when I was driving in. I read it in the paper a little bit. And we heard about this work. And, you know, we know that, I'm not from this area, but I know we got that college, Century College over there. And, man, we can maybe get them into some sort of story that, wow, maybe that we can get some of the beauticians over there or the firefighter trainees. Maybe we could kind of give them an internship here, or we could maybe develop another hotel.
Now, Mr. Berglund, we've come to the end of our program this week. Thank you, Mr. Berglund, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Viewers, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.